You should have signed the papers sooner, Michael. Might have saved you some dignity. Olivia said it loud enough for half the courthouse hallway to hear, then laughed as Brandon Hayes wrapped an arm around her waist like he'd already won something. The sound echoed across polished marble floors and glass walls, sharp and bright like a champagne toast at someone else's funeral. I stood there in a charcoal suit that suddenly felt 10 years older than it was, one hand in my pocket, the other holding a folder thick enough to change lives. Neither of them noticed. That was the funny thing about arrogant people. They stop looking for danger the second they think they've already won. The courthouse in downtown Dallas smelled like burnt coffee, old paper, and rain tracked in from the parking lot outside. Gray morning light pushed through the tall windows, washing everything in that cold color that makes people look tired even when they're smiling. Olivia didn't look tired. She looked radiant. Perfect blonde curls resting against the collar of her cream-colored coat. Diamond earrings catching the overhead lights. The same smile she used to give me across crowded restaurants before everything between us turned into lawyers, silence, and signed affidavits. Brandon leaned close and whispered something into her ear. She laughed harder. Not nervous laughter. Not uncomfortable laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from believing the person beside you is weak. You okay there, Mike? Brandon asked, glancing at me with a grin too polished to be sincere. Hell of a morning to lose half your life. Olivia smirked beside him like that line deserved applause. I looked at him for a second longer than he expected. Long enough for his smile to twitch at the edges. Then I nodded once. Calm. Controlled. Morning, Brandon. That seemed to disappoint him. Men like Brandon feed on reactions. Anger. Begging. Desperation. But silence. Silence makes people nervous. Especially when they can't read it. Olivia folded her arms. You still have time to make this easier, she said. Daniel already told your attorney the settlement's fair. Fair. Funny word. After 14 years of marriage. Fair apparently meant my house, my investments, part of Carter Freight Solutions, and monthly payments large enough to fund the lifestyle she planned to continue with the man standing beside her. She called it fair. I called it expensive arrogance. But I didn't say that. I just watched her. Watched the confidence in her eyes. The certainty. That certainty had started 8 months ago in Chicago, though she didn't know I knew that yet. Back then it was business conferences and delayed flights. Late-night texts hidden beneath blankets. Smiles aimed at phone screens instead of me. Small fractures spreading beneath the surface of a marriage I thought was built on steel. Funny how quickly steel turns to rust when nobody's maintaining it. Brandon checked his watch dramatically. Would hate to keep the judge waiting, he said. Big day for all of us. Then he smiled again. That smile told me everything. He thought this courtroom was the finish line. He thought walking into court beside another man's wife made him the winner of something meaningful. People confuse possession with victory all the time. Olivia stepped closer before they headed toward the courtroom doors. Her perfume hit me first. Vanilla and cedarwood. Familiar enough to hurt. You know, she said quietly, if you'd paid more attention to me these last few years, maybe none of this would have happened. There it was. The rewrite. The part where betrayal becomes justified because somebody felt lonely, unseen, restless. I stared at her for a moment, noticing how comfortable she'd become turning our marriage into a story where she was somehow the victim. Then I looked past her toward the courtroom doors slowly opening down the hall. Maybe, I said calmly. Or maybe you just underestimated me. Her expression flickered for half a second. Just enough. Then Brandon touched her shoulder, and the moment disappeared. They walked toward the courtroom together, laughing softly again, disappearing beneath the cold fluorescent lights while rain tapped against the courthouse windows like impatient fingers. Around us, lawyers shuffled paperwork, deputies escorted nervous strangers through metal detectors, and somewhere. Down the hallway a clerk called out another case number. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. But beneath my calm, something heavier settled into place. Because Olivia Carter thought today was about taking my life apart piece by piece. What she didn't realize was that I'd spent the last 8 months preparing for this exact walk into that courtroom. And before the day was over, that laugh of hers was going to disappear. People think betrayal happens in one moment. One kiss, one text message, one bad decision in a hotel room somewhere. But that is not how marriages really fall apart. They collapse slowly, like a ceiling rotting behind fresh paint. Quiet at first, invisible, Then one day the whole thing caves in and everybody acts surprised. I met Olivia Carter when I was 28 years old and too busy building a business to notice how lonely ambition can make a man. Back then I drove a beat-up silver Chevy Silverado with 200,000 miles on it, and enough rattles to sound like a toolbox every time I hit a pothole. Carter Freight Solutions was nothing more than 3 trucks, a rented warehouse outside Fort Worth, and me sleeping 4 hours a night on a leather couch that smelled like coffee and diesel fuel. Olivia walked into my life wearing a navy blue dress and carrying a legal pad under her arm at a charity fundraiser downtown. Blonde hair, sharp green eyes, smile calm enough to stop a room without trying. She worked in corporate communications for a real estate firm back then, long before luxury dinners and social media vacations became her entire personality. She laughed at my jokes, asked questions about my company like she actually cared about the answers. And when I talked about expanding routes across Texas, she looked at me like I was already becoming the man I wanted to be. That look can ruin a man, because once someone believes in you early enough, you start building your future around keeping that belief alive. We got married 18 months later in a small church north of Dallas. Nothing extravagant. White roses. Summer heat thick enough to melt the frosting off the cake. My mother crying quietly in the second row while Olivia squeezed my hand so tightly I thought maybe this was what safety felt like. For a while it was. The business grew faster than I expected. 3 trucks became 12. 12 became 40. Warehouses in Texas turned into contracts across Oklahoma and Louisiana. I spent years waking up before sunrise, chasing invoices, managing drivers, handling breakdowns on highways at 2 in the morning, while Olivia slowly drifted deeper into a world of rooftop parties, networking dinners, and polished people who talked more about appearances than loyalty. At first, she still waited up for me, still kissed me when I came home smelling like engine oil and road dust. But success changes people in strange ways, especially when they start believing they deserve more than the person who helped build the foundation beneath them. The shift happened gradually enough to ignore. She stopped asking about my day, started spending longer in front of mirrors before business events. Her phone stayed face down at dinner. Conversations became shorter, sharper, like every sentence between us had edges now. One night at a restaurant in uptown Dallas, she spent 20 straight minutes texting someone while I sat across from her pretending not to notice. When I finally asked if everything was okay, she smiled without looking up and said, "It is just work." Funny thing about lies. They are rarely convincing the first time. People just choose to believe them because the alternative hurts too much. Looking back now, I realize the marriage probably ended months before either of us admitted it out loud. Maybe even years. But I kept telling myself what men like me always tell themselves. Work harder. Provide more. Stay steady. Hold the line. Because if you can carry enough weight, eventually things balance back out. That was the lie I believed while Olivia slowly became someone I no longer recognized. And somewhere in the middle of all that distance, Brandon Hayes walked into our lives wearing a $5,000 watch and a smile that looked rehearsed. The first time I met Brandon Hayes was at a rooftop networking event in downtown Chicago 8 months before the divorce papers showed up at my office. I remember the city lights reflecting off glass towers while cold wind rolled between buildings high above the street. Olivia stood beside me in a black dress that probably cost more than my first truck payment, one hand resting lightly on my arm, while she smiled at strangers like she belonged there. Maybe she did. By then she had already started drifting into that polished corporate world where everybody talked too smoothly and laughed half a second too loudly. Brandon fit into it perfectly. 6'2", expensive haircut, white teeth, cufflinks that probably cost a month of groceries for most people. The kind of man who shook your hand while already scanning the room for someone more useful. "Michael Carter," he said with that easy confidence wealthy men practice in mirrors. "I have heard a lot about you." I nodded once. Hopefully nothing criminal. He laughed hard enough to seem friendly. Olivia laughed too. That stuck with me later. Not because it mattered then, but because memory becomes sharper after betrayal. Tiny moments suddenly glow like warning lights you ignored on a dashboard. Brandon worked as a corporate consultant for a development group Olivia had recently started doing public relations work for. At least that was the story at first. Business dinners became strategy meetings. Strategy meetings became weekend conferences. Conferences became unexplained flights and hotel receipts charged to cards she suddenly guarded like state secrets. Still, I kept telling myself not to become one of those paranoid husbands who sees disaster in every late text message. Successful marriages require trust. That is what people say right before trust destroys them. The real change was not the travel. It was Olivia herself. She started looking at me differently. Like I belonged to an older version of her life she had already outgrown. One night, I came home after 14 straight hours dealing with a wrecked freight truck outside Amarillo. My boots were covered in dust, and my shoulders felt like concrete. Olivia barely glanced up from her phone when I walked into the kitchen. "You smell like diesel again," she muttered while scrolling. Again, such a small word. But marriage dies in small words long before lawyers get involved. I poured myself coffee, even though it was almost midnight, and noticed her smiling faintly at something on her screen. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she answered too quickly. Then she locked the phone and stood up. "I am exhausted. I have an early call tomorrow." No kiss. No warmth. Just distance wrapped in politeness. The kind that hurts more because it sounds civilized. After that, the patterns became impossible not to notice. Brandon's name kept surfacing casually in conversation. Brandon recommended this restaurant. Brandon knew someone in Aspen. Brandon thought market trends were shifting. Funny how another man's name can slowly move into your house without ever appearing physically in the room. Then came the Chicago trip. Olivia claimed it was a 3-day media summit near the riverfront. The night before she left, I stood in our closet watching her pack outfits more carefully than I had seen her pack for our anniversary in years. She hummed softly while folding dresses into her suitcase, almost excited. "Big event?" I asked. "Potentially huge clients," she said without looking at me. "You know how these things work." I nodded like I believed her. Maybe part of me wanted to. That trip changed everything, even though I did not realize it yet. Because while Olivia was walking through luxury hotels beside Brandon Hayes pretending they were just colleagues, I was back in Texas handling payroll, reviewing shipping contracts, and unknowingly taking the first steps toward protecting myself from the storm already building inside my marriage. Funny thing about instinct. Sometimes your heart notices betrayal long before your mind is ready to admit it. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday afternoon folded inside a clean white envelope that looked far too polite to carry something capable of ending 14 years of marriage. I was sitting in my office reviewing fuel contracts while rain streaked across the warehouse windows outside. Drivers moved between loading docks in reflective jackets while forklifts beeped somewhere below my office floor. Normal sounds. Normal day. Then my assistant knocked softly and placed the envelope on my desk with that awkward expression people wear when they know something bad is inside but do not want to become part of it. "Courier dropped this off personally," she said quietly. The second I saw Olivia's attorney letterhead, something inside me went cold. Not angry. Not shocked. Just cold. Like my body had finally caught up to what my instincts had been trying to tell me for months. I opened the packet slowly while the rain kept tapping against the glass behind me. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Requests for temporary spousal support. Division of marital assets. Residential property claims. Equity percentages. The language sounded clean and professional, but underneath every sentence sat the same message. She was not just leaving. She planned to collect a reward on the way out. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Funny thing about betrayal. The actual confirmation rarely hurts as much as the months leading up to it. By the time the truth arrives, part of you has already been grieving. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. "Olivia." I almost ignored it. Almost. "You got the papers?" she asked casually, like we were discussing dinner reservations instead of dismantling a life together. "I got them." Silence stretched between us for a second. Then she sighed dramatically. "Michael, let us not make this uglier than it needs to be." There it was again. That polished corporate tone she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable while quietly holding a knife behind her back. "Your attorney is asking for half the company," I said calmly. "You built that during our marriage," she answered immediately. "I supported you for years." Supported. Another funny word. I thought about the nights I slept in freight yards handling breakdowns while she attended charity galas downtown. Thought about the birthdays I missed growing the business while she posted filtered vacation photos online beside glasses of expensive wine. But I did not argue. Arguing with someone already rewriting history is like trying to nail smoke to a wall. What do you really want, Olivia? I asked quietly. Her answer came too. Fast. Freedom. Then the line went dead. 3 days later, Brandon moved into the condo she claimed she had just recently rented. Amazing how quickly logistics work themselves out when people have been planning behind your back longer than they admit. Mutual friends stopped calling as often after that. Some picked sides quietly. Others pretended neutrality while feeding information both directions like suburban diplomats. Dallas society loves scandal as long as it happens to someone else. One Friday night, I attended a Logistics Association fundraiser alone because canceling would have looked weak. The ballroom smelled like whiskey, perfume, and polished money. Halfway through the evening, I saw Olivia across the room wearing a silver dress, while Brandon stood beside her with one hand casually resting against her lower back. They looked comfortable together. Too comfortable. Not like two people cautiously starting a relationship. Like two people who had already been living inside one for a while. Olivia noticed me watching and leaned closer into Brandon intentionally. A performance. Everything between us had become a performance now. Brandon raised his bourbon glass slightly toward me with the kind of smile men use when they believe another man has already lost. I remember standing there beneath crystal chandeliers realizing something important. They wanted emotion from me. Rage. Public humiliation. A mistake. Because mistakes become leverage in courtrooms. That was the moment I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. And once I started looking carefully at the timing of everything, the missing money, the hidden transfers, and the sudden confidence behind Olivia's divorce demands, I realized this was never just about love ending. This had been planned. The strange thing about betrayal is that once you finally accept it, your mind starts replaying every moment differently. Every late dinner, every hidden smile, every unexplained expense suddenly lines up like dominoes falling backward through time. About 2 weeks after the divorce papers arrived, I stopped trying to save my marriage and started trying to understand it. That was the real turning point. Not anger. Clarity. I hired a forensic accountant named Rachel Mercer out of Houston. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm voice. The kind of woman who probably noticed lies before people even finished speaking them. Daniel Brooks recommended her after reviewing the divorce filings in his downtown office overlooking Clyde Warren Park. Something about this feels coordinated, he said while flipping through Olivia's financial requests. These numbers are too specific. Somebody has been feeding her information. He was right. Olivia suddenly knew details about holding accounts, equipment depreciation, projected expansions, and investment structures I had never once discussed with her during our marriage. Not because I was hiding anything, but because she never cared enough to ask. Until now. Rachel started quietly reviewing 6 months of financial activity tied to our joint accounts, business reimbursements, and Olivia's corporate expense records. 3 days later, she called me just after sunrise while I sat alone on my back patio watching Texas heat rise off the fence line behind the house. Michael, she said carefully, I think your wife has been preparing for this longer than you realize. Those words settled into my chest like concrete. Rachel found repeated luxury hotel bookings tied to development conferences where Brandon Hayes had attended the same events. Shared transportation receipts. Duplicate meal charges. Private consulting invoices routed through shell vendors connected to Brandon's firm. Nothing explicit. Nothing reckless. But enough patterns to tell the real story underneath the paperwork. Olivia and Brandon had not stumbled into each other emotionally. They had built something deliberately while planning an exit strategy around my assets at the same time. Funny how quickly romance starts looking like business once lawyers get involved. But the biggest surprise was not the affair. It was what they thought they understood about my company. Olivia believed Carter Freight Solutions was the center of my financial life because that was the version I allowed most people to see. Trucks, warehouses, contracts, visible success. What she never paid attention to were the structures beneath it. Years earlier, after watching another business owner lose everything in a brutal divorce, I quietly reorganized major holdings under Carter Logistics Holdings, a layered trust structure managed through separate ownership entities Daniel helped establish long before my marriage started falling apart. Not because I expected betrayal, because smart businessmen prepare for storms while skies are still blue. Most operational assets remained protected behind corporate layers Olivia barely understood. She saw revenue. She did not understand control. That difference was about to matter inside a courtroom. Daniel spread documents across his conference table one evening while city lights reflected against the office windows behind him. "She is assuming emotional pressure will make you settle," he said calmly. "That is why Brandon keeps provoking you publicly. They want mistakes. Anger. Something they can leverage." I thought back to the fundraiser. The courthouse hallway. The smug confidence in Brandon's face every time he looked at me. He really believed I was the wounded husband desperately trying to hold on to a woman already gone. And maybe part of me had been. But another part had already moved somewhere colder. More focused. "What happens if we fight this fully?" I asked quietly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "If the timeline proves infidelity during strategic financial concealment?" He paused slightly. "Then the courtroom they are walking into expecting victory could become the worst day of their lives." Outside, traffic rolled through downtown Dallas beneath glowing office towers, while thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the skyline. I stood near the glass holding a folder thick with evidence nobody else knew existed yet. Hotel records, transfer histories, internal communications, legal structures. 8 months of preparation sitting silently beneath my fingertips. And for the first time since Olivia walked away, I realized something important. She thought she was divorcing the exhausted version of me who still believed love alone could hold a marriage together. She had no idea she was walking into a legal war against the man who built an empire from nothing. By the time the final hearing arrived, Olivia carried herself like someone already celebrating a victory she believed was guaranteed. You could see it in the way she walked through the courthouse that morning beside Brandon Hayes, shoulders relaxed, smile effortless, expensive heels clicking across marble floors like punctuation marks at the end of my marriage. People underestimate confidence when it is built on incomplete information. That was their first mistake. The courtroom itself felt colder than the hallway outside. Dark wood panels. American flag standing motionless beside the judge's bench. Rows of empty spectator seats except for a few attorneys waiting on later cases, and 2 older women whispering quietly near the back. Rain pressed against the courthouse windows while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Everything smelled faintly like coffee and paper. Olivia sat at the petitioner's table wearing cream-colored silk beneath a fitted blazer that probably cost more than my first monthly mortgage payment. Brandon sat directly behind her despite not belonging there legally. That alone told me how comfortable they had become turning this entire process into a performance. Every few minutes he leaned forward whispering something into her ear that made her smile. Their confidence would have almost been impressive if it was not built on such arrogance. Daniel Brooks sat beside me reviewing notes calmly while I stared ahead at the empty judge's bench. "They are overplaying it," he murmured quietly without looking up. "Good." I nodded once. My pulse stayed steady. That surprised me. Months earlier, the sight of Olivia touching another man probably would have shattered something inside me. But heartbreak has an expiration date when reality keeps forcing clarity into your hands. Eventually, pain hardens into observation. Judge Eleanor Whitman entered exactly at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a stack of files beneath one arm. Mid-60s. Silver hair cut short. Sharp eyes behind reading glasses that missed nothing. The entire courtroom rose together before settling back into silence. Olivia's attorney stood first. Richard Klein. Expensive suit. Expensive voice. The kind of divorce lawyer who specialized in making wealthy separations sound morally justified. He walked toward the center confidently while adjusting his cufflinks. "Your Honor," he began smoothly. "Mrs. Carter dedicated 14 years supporting the growth of Carter Freight Solutions while sacrificing her own opportunities in the process." I almost smiled hearing that. Olivia had not sacrificed anything except patience. Klein continued carefully painting a picture where Olivia became the emotionally neglected wife trapped beside a work-obsessed husband too distracted by business to maintain a marriage. Strategic language. Clean language. Designed to sound sympathetic without technically lying. Every few sentences Olivia lowered her eyes slightly at exactly the right moments like she had rehearsed vulnerability in front of a mirror. Brandon watched proudly from behind her. At one point, he actually smirked toward me when Klein mentioned emotional abandonment. Funny how people grow bold when they mistake silence for surrender. Then came the financial requests, partial ownership claims, property divisions, expanded support calculations tied to projected company growth. Numbers floated through the courtroom large enough to make younger versions of me dizzy. But all I could think about was how confident Olivia looked while asking for pieces of structures she did not actually understand. Daniel remained perfectly calm beside me while Klein finished presenting their argument. No interruptions, no objections, just patience. That seemed to irritate Olivia more than anger would have. I could feel her glancing toward me every few minutes, searching for signs of frustration. She wanted emotional damage visible on my face because that would confirm the story she built in her head. But I gave her nothing. Finally, Judge Whitman folded her hands together. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly. "Your response." Daniel stood slowly beside me, buttoning his suit jacket with almost casual calm. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "But before we address the financial misunderstandings presented this morning, my client would like the court to review several documents directly related to the timeline and intent behind this divorce filing." Olivia's confidence flickered for the first time. Small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Brandon leaned forward slightly behind her. Daniel reached down, opened the thick black folder resting beside him, and placed the first document carefully onto the table in front of the judge. The room suddenly felt very quiet, because in that exact moment, Olivia still believed she was walking through the final steps of taking my life apart. She had no idea the ground underneath her was already collapsing. The air inside the courtroom changed the second Daniel slid those documents across the polished wood table toward Judge Whitman. It was subtle at first, just a shift in posture. Olivia straightened slightly in her chair. Brandon stopped smiling. Richard Klein adjusted his tie and leaned forward with the cautious expression lawyers wear when confidence suddenly collides with uncertainty. Judge Whitman opened the first folder carefully, flipping through pages in complete silence while rain continued tapping softly against the courthouse windows behind her bench. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed louder now. Daniel stood calmly beside me with both hands folded in front of him. "Your Honor," he said evenly. The petitioner presented this case as a straightforward marital dissolution involving shared financial assets accumulated during the marriage. However, the timeline and intent behind these proceedings are directly relevant to the court's understanding of the requested settlement. Olivia finally spoke for the first time since the hearing started. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Her voice stayed controlled, but I heard the tension underneath it. Daniel did not even look at her. "It means," he continued calmly, "that Mrs. Carter initiated this divorce while actively concealing a long-term extramarital relationship tied directly to coordinated financial positioning." The room went still. Brandon shifted in his seat behind Olivia. Klein stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making inflammatory accusations irrelevant to property division." Judge Whitman kept reading without looking up. "Sit down, Mr. Klein." His expression tightened. Slowly he sat. That was the moment Olivia realized things were moving outside her control. Daniel reached for another folder. These records include hotel reservations, travel logs, expense reimbursements, and communication timelines establishing a pattern of undisclosed travel between Mrs. Carter and Mr. Brandon Hayes dating back over 8 months prior to filing. Brandon let out a quiet breath beside us. Not quite panic, but close enough to hear if you were paying attention. Olivia turned slightly toward him for half a second before facing forward again. Tiny movements reveal everything under pressure. Judge Whitman removed her glasses briefly, eyes narrowing as she reviewed another page. "Mr. Hayes attended these same events repeatedly?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel answered, "including several privately funded trips billed under misleading corporate expense categories." Olivia shook her head quickly. "That is completely out of context." Daniel finally looked directly at her. "Calm. Precise. Then perhaps you can explain the private Aspen reservations billed through Shell consulting accounts connected to Mr. Hayes' firm." Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that presses against your ears. Brandon looked down at the table. Olivia's face lost color slowly, like someone dimming lights inside a room. But Daniel was not finished. He placed one final document directly in front of Judge Whitman. "Additionally," he said, The petitioner's financial requests are based on significant misunderstandings regarding ownership structures connected to Carter Freight Solutions. Klein stood again immediately. Your Honor, this is absolutely inappropriate. Mr. Klein, Judge Whitman interrupted sharply. If you stand up one more time before I finish reviewing these documents, I will hold you in contempt. Sit down. He sat. Hard. I watched Olivia carefully while Judge Whitman reviewed the ownership structures Daniel had prepared months earlier. Trust agreements, holding entities, layered corporate protections, operational control documents. Olivia blinked repeatedly while scanning copies handed toward her side of the courtroom. She looked confused first, then frustrated, then something far worse. Fear. No, she whispered quietly while flipping faster through the pages. That is not possible. Daniel remained perfectly still. Mrs. Carter was never listed as ownership beneficiary on the protected entities tied to the majority of operational assets, he explained. Furthermore, the timing of several financial inquiries made during the affair period strongly suggests intentional attempts to estimate protected asset exposure before filing. Brandon looked toward Olivia sharply, really looked at her for the first time all morning. Funny how quickly romance changes when money starts disappearing. Judge Whitman closed the final folder slowly and removed her glasses again. Her expression had changed completely now. The sympathy Olivia spent months building inside this courtroom was evaporating in real time. Mrs. Carter, the judge said carefully, were you aware these financial structures existed before filing your claims? Olivia opened her mouth, then stopped. Across the courtroom, Brandon stared at the floor while rain rolled down the courthouse windows like streaks of silver. And for the first time since this entire nightmare started, I realized something strange. I no longer felt angry watching them fall apart, just tired. Because the truth about betrayal is this. The people who destroy trust almost always believe they are smarter than the person they betrayed, right up until the moment reality finally walks into the room. Olivia's hands started shaking when she reached the final section of the ownership documents. Not dramatically, just enough for the papers between her fingers to make a faint rustling sound in the silence. The kind of sound people notice when a room suddenly loses all confidence. Across the courtroom, Brandon Hayes looked like a man realizing too late that he boarded the wrong flight. His relaxed posture disappeared completely now. No more smug grin. No more whispered jokes. Just tension sitting heavy across his face while Judge Whitman continued reviewing every page Daniel placed in front of her. Mr. Brooks, the judge said carefully, am I understanding correctly that the majority of these operational assets were legally transferred into protected holding entities prior to the petitioner filing for divorce? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel answered calmly. Several years prior, in fact. Olivia looked up sharply. You never told me any of this. It was the first honest thing she had said all morning. I turned slightly toward her. You never asked. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time since she walked into that courthouse beside Brandon, the confidence was gone. What replaced it looked smaller, colder, like someone waking up halfway through a nightmare realizing the exits disappeared hours ago. Richard Klein cleared his throat and leaned toward Olivia urgently, whispering too low for anyone else to hear clearly. But panic has a body language all its own. Quick movements, tight jaws, eyes darting toward documents hoping the numbers somehow change when looked at differently. Judge Whitman set another folder down firmly. Mrs. Carter, she said evenly, this court takes financial transparency seriously, particularly when significant settlement requests are involved. Olivia swallowed hard. I was advised those assets were marital property. Brandon shifted behind her immediately, staring toward Klein now instead of me. Funny how quickly alliances crack once consequences arrive. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Your Honor, there is another issue relevant to the petitioner's claims. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. Just 1 second. But it looked like exhaustion finally catching up to somebody who spent too long pretending control. Daniel continued calmly. Our forensic review identified multiple financial inquiries conducted by the petitioner during the extramarital relationship period, specifically targeting valuation estimates tied to protected operational structures. Judge Whitman's expression sharpened immediately, meaning Daniel placed another report onto the bench. meaning the petitioner appears to have been strategically gathering financial exposure information while simultaneously concealing the affair relationship tied to Mr. Hayes. Silence again. Heavy this time. Brandon leaned forward suddenly. Hold on, he snapped. This is insane. Olivia did not know anything about company structures. Olivia looked at him instantly. Wrong move. Because panic reveals connections no lawyer can hide fast enough. Judge Whitman noticed it too. Mr. Hayes, she said coldly, you are not counsel in this proceeding. You will remain silent. Brandon leaned back slowly, jaw tight. Olivia stared down at the table now, mascara beginning to darken faintly beneath her eyes. Not ruined. Just slipping. Like everything else around her. Outside, thunder rolled low across downtown Dallas while rain blurred the skyline beyond the courthouse windows. I sat there quietly watching 14 years collapse into paperwork, legal language, and consequences. Strange thing was, I did not feel victorious. Not the way movies make you expect revenge to feel. There was no rush. No celebration. Just a heavy kind of sadness that settles into a man when somebody he once loved becomes a stranger, sitting 20 feet away blaming the world for choices she made herself. Judge Whitman folded her hands together carefully. Based on the information presented today, she said, the court will be reevaluating all proposed settlement assumptions immediately. Olivia's face went pale. Completely pale. Klein started flipping through notes frantically while Brandon stared at the floor like he was mentally calculating how expensive loyalty suddenly became. Then came the final blow. Judge Whitman looked directly toward Olivia. Mrs. Carter, this court also questions the credibility of several financial representations submitted during these proceedings. That will be addressed separately. Olivia finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Her shoulders just lowered slowly like something inside her gave out all at once. She looked toward me across the courtroom with eyes full of confusion, anger, regret, and something almost desperate underneath it. But by then it was too late for all of that. Because the truth about consequences is simple. They arrive quietly at first, then suddenly all at once. And as the courtroom sat frozen around us, beneath cold fluorescent lights and rolling Texas thunder, Olivia Carter finally understood the difference between leaving a marriage and losing everything. When the hearing finally ended, nobody moved right away. The courtroom stayed suspended in that strange silence people fall into after watching something collapse in real time. Judge Whitman gathered her documents carefully and stepped through the side door without another word, leaving behind nothing but the faint sound of rain against courthouse windows and the quiet panic sitting on Olivia's side of the room. Richard Klein immediately leaned toward her, voice low and urgent now, no longer polished, no longer confident. Brandon stood up slowly behind them, running one hand through his hair while staring toward the floor like he was trying to calculate how much damage had just landed on his life. Funny thing about courtroom victories. They rarely look dramatic in person. No music. No applause. Just people realizing consequences are real. Daniel closed our folders calmly beside me. We are done here for today, he said quietly. I nodded once and stood, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders from hours of sitting beneath cold fluorescent lights. Across the room, Olivia looked up at me for the first time since everything unraveled. Really looked at me. Not as the exhausted husband she dismissed months ago. Not as the man she assumed would break quietly while she walked away with another life waiting beside Brandon Hayes. She looked at me like she was finally seeing someone unfamiliar. Michael, she said softly. Just my name. Nothing else after it. Brandon's jaw tightened immediately hearing the tone in her voice. There it was. The shift. Tiny. Human. Too late. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and walked toward the aisle without answering. Because some conversations expire the second trust dies. Behind me, I heard Olivia stand quickly. Michael, wait. Her heels clicked sharply across the courtroom floor as she followed me into the hallway outside. The courthouse corridor felt quieter now, almost empty except for distant elevator bells and attorneys moving between offices carrying stacks of paperwork. Rainwater streaked the tall windows overlooking downtown Dallas, while gray afternoon light spread across the marble floor. Olivia stopped a few feet away from me, breathing unevenly, mascara faintly smudged beneath tired green eyes. She looked smaller somehow, less polished, like reality had finally stripped away the performance. You planned all of this, she whispered. I looked at her calmly. No, I said. I prepared for it. That hit harder than anger ever could have. She folded her arms tightly against herself. You could have told me about the trusts. I almost laughed hearing that. Not because it was funny. Because betrayal makes people believe honesty is something they still deserve afterward. You stopped being interested in my life a long time ago, Olivia, I answered quietly. You only became interested in my finances once Brandon showed up. Her face tightened immediately. It was not like that. Maybe not at first, I said. But somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as a husband and started seeing me as an obstacle. Silence settled between us again. Heavy. Familiar. The kind of silence that used to terrify me months ago. Now it just felt final. Down the hallway, Brandon appeared near the courtroom doors, watching us carefully with tension written all over his face. Funny how quickly confident men become suspicious once consequences start costing money. Olivia noticed him too. For one awkward second, nobody moved. Then I understood something important. They deserved each